Good morning, everyone. I'm so thankful to be able to be together this morning to worship with you and with our Father, with the Lord, with His Holy Spirit, and being able to concentrate upon the throne and being able to think about the great things He's done for us. I'm thankful for the good weather. I love Sundays, but I always think that a Sunday needs to actually be a Sunday. And so when there's storms, when there's bad weather, when there's rain on Sunday, it just doesn't feel the same. And so I am praising the Lord, giving Him glory for the good weather that we are enjoying this morning. A few weeks ago, we started a series of lessons where we're going to sprinkle them throughout the year that focus on getting to know your apostles. And the purpose behind this lesson is so that when you have conversations with your neighbors whom you love very much, you can talk a little bit about the apostles. You can bring up things and personalities and characteristics of these apostles and maybe even relate them into your own life and maybe even relate them into your neighbor's life. And so the idea is let's get to know our apostles so that when we're having conversations with our neighbors whom we love very much, we can talk about these apostles. We started a few weeks ago with the Apostle Peter. We looked to see what Simon Peter said. We specifically looked at 1 Peter chapter 1. And we tried to make some application into our own lives. Some areas of growth, some areas that challenge us. And then a few weeks ago, Matthew talked about Simon Peter's brother, Andrew. And how Andrew was this observer. And how Andrew was this good seeker and a wonderful example for all of us. And I appreciated that very much. This morning, I'm excited to be able to talk to you about another set of brothers. Two brothers that I identify with, maybe even more so than Peter and Andrew. Today, I want to talk to you about the sons of Zebedee. We want to talk about James and John. Now, we know a lot about John. I think we know a lot about John because John's mentioned a lot in the Scriptures, and also because we have several writings from John. From the book of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and then also the book of Revelation. But with James, we don't have as much detail. With James, we have to find more detail. And there's a little bit in Scriptures, and there's some extra biblical data that's out there, historical documents that tell us a little bit about James. And when we start putting that together, we can get to know him as well. But this morning, we're going to look at these sons of Zebedee. But to be honest with you, they're better known by the nickname that Jesus gives to them. The Sons of Thunder. I love doing that. Last night, when I came up here to make sure everything was going to work well, I tested that out. But I had it up really loud. And I was standing directly here to video it. So loud that this stage shook. And I thought, I was a little scared. And I didn't want to scare any babies. Because the worst thing to do is to scare babies right now in the middle of a sermon. But let me tell you, this sound system really makes a good thunder. But let's talk about the Sons of Thunder. Because this is a nickname that Jesus gives to these two brothers, James and John. It was read for us just a moment ago in the book of Matthew when they're called. They're called the Sons of Zebedee, but Jesus had this nickname for them, the Sons of Thunder. And I'm not really sure exactly why they're called the Sons of Thunder, but I think we can see some details about that in just a moment. Let's examine each one of these guys and see some details just to set us up for who these characters are so that we get to know them, and then I think by the end of it, we'll get to know ourselves. First of all, when you look at James, we find that James was one of the first disciples that was called by Jesus. In Matthew chapter 4, verses 21 through 22, there we see that James and his brother John were called, with some other disciples as well. James was also a fisherman, like Peter and Andrew, with their father Zebedee and his brother John. I think they had a family business going on. I also think that they were a business partner with Peter and Andrew. And I think that they had a pretty good enterprise going on. And I think they were pretty well off financially because of this business that they had. Another detail that we find about James is that James was the first apostle to have been martyred. Not the first one to be killed. We understand that Judas, after he had betrayed the Lord, went and hung himself. And so he was not the first one to be killed, but certainly the first one to be martyred for the sake of Christ. In Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. That's something very special. I think that's special because we'll see a major transformation from who James was at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry and who he is at the end of his life, and how willing he was to put his life on the line for the sake of Christ. Some other things that we know about James is because he was in this inner circle with some other apostles, that he was able to witness some special events in Jesus' ministry. Specifically, he was one that was able to witness the raising of Jairus' daughter from the dead in Mark chapter 5. We also see that James is among the inner circle that witnessed the transfiguration in Matthew chapter 17. We also see that James witnesses Jesus' agony right before he is arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane in Matthew chapter 26. We also see his brother, John, has a lot of the same details with James. That's the way brothers are. You know, me and Seth, we have a lot of the same history. Some of the things that I experienced, Seth was right there to experience those things as well. Things that I did, Seth did as well. That's just the way brothers are. And so when you look at James's history, John is right there with him. And so these details also fit for John. Also one of the first disciples to be called by Jesus. Also a fisherman with his father Zebedee, with his brother James. Also, he was a business partner with Peter and Andrew. But then you see a little bit something different. You see some differences. John self-describes himself in his writings as the disciple whom Jesus loved. In John chapter 13 and verse 23 and 19 and verse 26 and in chapter 20 and verse 2. The disciple whom Jesus loved. Not one time does he refer to himself as John in the book of John. He just calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. Other details that we find that are kind of extra biblical. This one, obviously, the Bible has reference to. We understand that the biblical evidence of John being the author of the Gospel of John is there. And the evidence of him being the writer of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And obviously, the book of Revelation was written by John. So that's part of our details that we can find. But then you also find history tells us, this is not in the Bible, but extra biblical evidence, that tradition tells us that John was thrown into boiling oil, but when he emerged from that oil, he was unhurt. That's amazing to me, isn't it? Obviously, during the first century, miracles were able to take place, and certainly the apostles and disciples were able to perform those miracles. And I think here's a good example. If the tradition holds true, then this is a miracle, that he would be able to come out of boiling oil unhurt. If I get a splash of grease while I'm cooking bacon, I don't come out of there unhurt. It hurts. John's whole body in this oil comes out unhurt. Another detail about John that we can find in the Bible is that he was exiled to the Isle of Patmos for preaching Christ. There he receives the apocalyptic, the revelation from Jesus. And he writes it down, and that's what we have in the book of Revelation. We also see that tradition tells us that John died in Ephesus around 98 AD of just old age. It's interesting because tradition tells us that John was probably one of the youngest of the disciples. And all the other apostles were killed, martyred for the sake of Christ. But John just died of old age. And I think that he was probably the last one to have survived around 98 AD. These are some details about James and John. But you know, when you think about this nickname, the sons of thunder, I can't help but ask the question, why did Jesus call James and John the sons of thunder? Well, like I said, there's no answer that's really given. No answer that's really given to us. But, we can make some speculation. Maybe they had thunderous voices. Have you ever known someone that has just this thunderous voice, like a radio voice? When I was a kid, we listened to Magic 105, KMJX, Conway, Little Rock, rockin' the rock all night long. You remember that? Maybe you do. I don't know. That's what I listened to. Some people just have this thunderous voice. Bill Whittington has one of those thunderous voices, doesn't he? He gets up there to lead singing, and boy, it just sounds good, and you could hear that voice. Maybe James and John, as brothers, had thunderous voices, and that's why Jesus called them the sons of thunder. Or perhaps they just had thunderous personalities. You've known someone probably that just has this personality that is just boisterous, and they come into a room, they light up the room, they're just sometimes even obnoxious. I've known people that way. Sometimes I look at myself in the mirror and realize that I'm that obnoxious guy. Maybe that's James and John. Maybe James and John just had thunderous qualities. I don't know. Maybe they were big men. You've seen guys that are just big men. Tall, broad shoulders. I've known some people like that. I have a good close friend of mine. He's a big fella, and when I hug him, I feel like a little kid hugging him, getting my arms around him. And it's like, I don't know, maybe that's James and John. Whatever the case is, Jesus gives them this nickname, the sons of thunder. And I think that we can find some qualities of these men that help us to see maybe why they were called the sons of thunder. The thing is about thunder is that a lot of times it has a negative connotation. It can be scary for one thing. Like I said last night when I was testing out the sound for that sound effect, the whole room shook, this stage shook, and my heart fluttered. I was nervous. If you were to hear a storm like that, if you ever witnessed a storm and maybe you see that lightning and you know what's coming next, right? And you can maybe even brace yourself for it. But when it does, it just shakes everything. It can be scary. When me and Kira were first raising our babies, we would hear those storms. The kids are always afraid of storms, and we'd say, "Ooh, thunder!" Just to scare them. It was fun. Thunder can be nerve-wracking. And when you hear that storm coming, you can be a little nervous about it. And it can have negative connotation. Several years ago, it was about this time, I think April 24th, 25th, 26th, terrible tornado came through the Bologna area and destroyed a lot of that town. Kira and I went a few days later and helped work some of that area with some members of the church, helped cleaning up. Even months later and years later, around this time of year, when the people, my friends that live there in Bologna, when they see ominous clouds coming, their minds go back to that night when that tornado came through. Storms and thunder and lightning has a negative connotation a lot of times. And I think what we'll discover with the sons of thunder is that they had some negative moments in their life. But also, we'll notice by the end of this sermon that they had a change of heart. And that they grew, even as being sons of thunder, they grew to be more like Jesus and to the people that He wanted them to be. And I think by the end of it, as we get to know our apostles, the sons of thunder, we'll also get to know ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about it. Why were these men called the sons of thunder? Well, maybe it's because they had a thunderous temper. A temper that was not controlled. Go over with me to Luke chapter 9, and let's look at this passage here. Starting in verse 51. You have to remember, the very beginning of this chapter, Jesus had sent out the 12 apostles on a limited commission. Jesus had fed the 5,000. Peter has confessed Christ. Jesus foretells of his death. He tells them to take up their cross and follow him. Then he transfigures before Peter, James, and John. Jesus heals a boy with an unclean spirit. Then he again tells of his upcoming death. They have a conversation, the disciples do, about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. And now let's go down to verse 51. It says, "And when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face toward Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him, who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him." So Jesus knows that his upcoming death is to come, and he's going to head into Jerusalem to make some preparations for that. But on the way, the most direct route was to go through the city of Samaria. And so they were headed in that direction. And as they're making preparations to go and to settle in, maybe even spend the night in this village of the Samaritans, they go, and then verse 53 says, "But the people of Samaria did not receive him, because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, the sons of thunder, they saw it, they said, 'Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them?' But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village." James and John seem to have had a thunderous temper in this passage. And maybe that's what has given them the nickname, the Sons of Thunder. The Sons of Thunder are upset because the people of Samaria rejected Jesus. They wanted to call down fire from heaven to destroy these people in the same way that Elijah did. In the same way that Elijah called down fire to destroy the men of Samaria and the king Uzziah in 2 Kings chapter 1. Here in this passage of 2 Kings, you have where these people have turned and rejected God, and they have began to worship other gods, idolatry. And they had turned and rejected God, and so then God sends his prophet Elijah to these people to preach out against them. And so the king sends 50 people, and this one man to lead these 50 people against Elijah. And Elijah calls down fire from heaven and consumes those 50 people and that person that's leading them. The king sends another 50 and another man to lead. And Elijah calls down fire again from heaven and consumes those 50 people and eliminates them because they've rejected God. The king sends out a third group of 50 men and one man. But this man hangs back. And previously Elijah had says, "As a man of God, I call down this fire to consume them." But this third group, the man hangs back and he says, "Listen, smart fella, I've seen what happened to the other two groups, and I don't want any part of it." And so humbly he comes before him, and his life and those 50 men are spared. I wonder if James and John, as the sons of thunder, go back and remember what is recorded in 2 Kings chapter 1. I wonder if they go back and think, you know what? Here are these people, they rejected God, and now these Samaritans again are rejecting Jesus. We'll call down fire from heaven and consume them in the same way that Elijah did. Let's get them. I don't know, maybe that's them. Whatever the case is, Jesus rebukes them. he rebukes them in verse 55. Now my version, in what I'm reading here, the ESV, it just says, but he turned and rebuked them. But your version may have something more. There's more to that verse. And it's just a manuscript issue. There's some older manuscripts of the Scriptures that don't include what's written. And so newer manuscripts have more details. Now we're only talking just a little bit. But let me read to you what another version may say. I think the New American Standard gives us more details, and the King James Version gives us more details. The ESV leaves this part out, but I've got it here, and I want to read it to you. Jesus rebuked them, verse 55, and he says this, you do not know what kind of spirit you are of, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. Now, what does Jesus tell them? He tells them that they don't even know themselves. They've let their temper overcome them so much that they don't even realize who they are anymore. They don't know who they are. Perhaps they thought that they were being like Jesus. Maybe they thought that they were being like men of God, like Elijah, representing God. But they were mistaken. They did not represent God. They didn't know themselves. And also, they did not know Jesus' mission. Jesus says, I didn't come here to destroy men's lives. I came to save them. That's my mission. Jesus goes on later on and says in Luke chapter 19 and verse 10, this is where he meets Zacchaeus. You know, Zacchaeus, he was a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. And when the Lord came passing by, he looked up in that tree and he said, Zacchaeus, come down from there, for I'm going to your house today. And Jesus says in this context, in Luke chapter 19 verse 10, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. That's Jesus' mission. And Jesus again here says to these men that his purpose is not to destroy men's lives, but to save them. They didn't know Jesus' mission. It was not to come and burn people up with fire from heaven, but to save them. The application is so simple for us today. If we lose control of our temper, when we lose control of our temper, because you know what? That's me. For Alex, it's not if I lose control of my temper. It's when Alex loses control of his temper, because this is something that Alex struggled with, and I'm probably the only one in this room that does it. I guarantee it. Alex loses control of his temper. When we lose control of our temper, we lose grip on who we really are and what our mission is. These men, they didn't know themselves, is what Jesus says. And they didn't know his mission. And a lot of times when we lose control of our temper, we become someone who we are really not. I'm speaking from experience here. I know that times that I've lost my temper, I look back and say, that's not who I am. Why am I acting like this? This is not who I really am. Jesus says, you don't know yourself. You've lost who you really are. And when we lose our control, when we lose control of our temper, we become something that we're not. And we also lose grip on what our mission is. These men, they didn't know Jesus' mission. And sometimes when we lose control of our temper, we forget what we're really here to do. And that is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. We've got to know who we really are and what our mission is. Because guess what? Our mission is the same as Christ's mission, to seek and to save that which was lost. And when we lose our temper, that's hard to do. Maybe these men were sons of thunder because they had a thunderous tongue. Go with me over to the book of Mark in chapter 9. Mark chapter 9. James and John had a thunderous tongue, and maybe that's why Jesus has given them the nickname the Sons of Thunder. Read with me. Starting in verse 38, John said to him, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." But Jesus said, "Do not stop him. For no one who does a mighty work in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. For the one who is not against us is for us. For truly I say to you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ will by no means lose his reward." Maybe this is why they're called the Sons of Thunder. They didn't know how to control their tongue. These Sons of Thunder, and I think with the other disciples, because in the context we see in verse 35 that Jesus sat down with the 12. So I think all 12 of them are there, and maybe all 12 of them saw this man casting out demons, and we can certainly include the Sons of Thunder, James and John, but let's just make application to James and John, because that's who we're studying this morning. So these Sons of Thunder are guilty of saying things before they thought about what they're saying. A lot of times we're guilty of this same thing. You've heard it been said, you think before you what? You speak. You think before you speak. And these guys are guilty of what? Speaking before they thought. They spoke to the man that was casting out demons in Jesus' name and tried to get him to stop, and they shouldn't have. They should have thought about it before they made any kind of move to try to stop him. And certainly they should have thought about it before they told Jesus about what had happened. But they were speaking before they thought of us. And like a lot of us, boy, we'll shoot off our mouths before taking careful aim. And these Sons of Thunder, and like us, they ignored common sense and they thundered before they thought. And Jesus is going to rebuke them. So they tell this story to Jesus, and they say, "There's this fella, this man that was casting out demons in Jesus' name." It wasn't like he was a false prophet. It was in Jesus' name he was doing this. But they warned him because he was not following them. He was not one of the 12. And so Jesus rebukes them. Verse 39. "Don't stop him. For one who does a mighty work in my name will soon be able, will not soon be able to speak evil of me." In other words, Jesus is saying, when someone is doing good, let them do good. Let them do good. Don't stop them. And so he rebukes them. Why? Because the gospel is not copyrighted. True greatness is not cliquish. True greatness cannot say, "Well, we're going to do this over here, and y'all are going to do this over here, and well, we're jealous of you if you do this over here, and we're not included." The gospel, the church, can't be cliquish. It can't be separated that way. The gospel it has all-inclusive characteristics. Everybody is a part of it. Maybe this man that was casting out demons in Jesus' name was a part of the 70 that Jesus sent out earlier, following Jesus and doing these great things. Maybe he was a part of that group, but he was not a part of the 12. And so James and John says, we tried to stop this guy because he's not a part of us. I don't know. It doesn't really even matter about this other fella, because Jesus doesn't rebuke him. Jesus rebukes the Sons of Thunder. And he tells them they shouldn't have stopped him. Maybe that's why they're called the Sons of Thunder. They're speaking before they thought. You see, because the gospel, it can and it should be preached by everyone and anyone who is following Jesus. Anybody that's working for Him and not against Him. They didn't include everyone, and these sons of thunder, they made their opinion known, and they didn't control their tongue. The application is simple for us too, because if we lose control, not if we lose control of our tongue, when we lose control of our tongue, we lose our grip on the whole goal of the gospel. This is where we make mistakes. We let our tongue get in the way. And the whole point of the gospel is to teach people the good news of Jesus Christ. And sometimes things that we say get in the way of that goal. And we can hinder the progress of the gospel because we're running our mouths and we're not thinking before we're speaking. Maybe that's why they're called the sons of thunder. One more. Maybe it was because of their thunderous tenacity. Now, tenacity is this word that just means that you have determination or ambition. And it's not necessarily a negative word at all. It could be a positive thing. You want tenacity, but it needs to be healthy tenacity, healthy determination. And I know in this example with the sons of thunder, they had an unhealthy level of tenacity. Go over with me to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10. I'm not going to read the whole passage here, for verse 35 through 45. I think we'll get to about verse 41, because I can make these points just in these verses. It says, "And James and John, our sons of thunder, the sons of Zebedee, came to him and said to him, 'Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you.'" Now, I can't help but think, okay, guys, it's just funny to me to think about them asking the Lord, "Listen, we want you to do whatever we tell you to do." They're talking to Jesus here. They're talking about the creator of all things. Hey, whatever we say, we want you to do. You know, I don't like it when someone tells me that. Maybe that's where, Alex's personality comes out, and, I don't like to be told what to do. I'm kind of a rebel anyway. I think Kira may be the only person that may be able to say, "Whatever I say, I want you to do." And even then, I don't like it. But I would listen to her because I trust her. Here's the sons of thunder coming to Jesus, and they say, "We want you to do whatever we say. Do whatever we say." Well, Jesus responds and says, and he said to them, "Well, what do you want me to do for you?" And they said, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left hand in your glory." All these sons of thunder, they elbowed their way again to this limelight, a place they really didn't belong. They treated Jesus as if he was some kind of genie in the bottle, where I'm going to ask him, wish for something, and then he's just going to do it. I wonder if sometimes we treat Jesus that way too. What did they want? Well, they wanted two positions of power. Now, Jesus just told them earlier about who's the greatest in the kingdom. He just said in verse 35 of chapter 9, the person that's the greatest is the one who is going to be a servant. And here these sons of thunder now come to Jesus and say, "Hey, we want you to do whatever we say, and what we want is for you to give us position number 1 and 2 in your glory. When you establish that kingdom, we want to be right there with you." Now, why did they think that they could have these positions of power? I don't know. There's maybe a little bit of speculation. Maybe they thought that they could have that because they were relatives. There's some evidence that Jesus and James and John were cousins. Some biblical evidence for that. That's the sons of Zebedee were first cousins with Jesus. Zebedee and his wife Salome, not salami, that's a deli meat. Salome was able to they're relatives with Joseph and Mary. And so maybe it's because they think, well, we're relatives, so we'll get this position of power because we're related to the right guy. Maybe they thought that they could have this position of power because they were in the inner circle. Sure, they were in all these great places with Jesus, from the transfiguration to being with him. Anywhere Jesus went secretively, Peter and James and John were basically there as well. And they thought, okay, listen, we're already doing this. We're already a part of this inner circle. Go ahead and name us. Make it official. Give us the title of position 1 and 2 on your right hand and on your left hand. Maybe they thought because of financial success that they've had in their business, that they thought, listen, we're already successful, we can afford it, put us in these positions of power because we are well off and wealthy. I don't know exactly why they wanted it. But Jesus rebukes them. In verse 38, Jesus said to them, you do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism of which I am baptized? And he said to them, they said to him, we are able. And Jesus said to them, the cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. All these sons of thunder, Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. You don't know what you're asking. I think, this is Alex's opinion, when Jesus talks about being lifted up to his glory, I think Jesus is talking about when he's lifted up on the cross of Calvary. And if James and John were to be lifted up on the right hand or on the left hand side of Jesus in his glory, they would have been on the two crosses on either side of Jesus. But Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm going to drink? And what that means is are you going to consume the things that I'm going to consume? He asked them, are you going to be baptized with the baptism that I'm going to be baptized with? And that's a bad translation. The word baptism there would be better be translated like immersed. Because the question is are you ready to be in something that I'm going to be in? Are you ready to go into it the way that I'm going to go into it? Surrounded, immersed into what I am going to be surrounded and immersed in? Of course they say, well, yeah, we're able. And he says, oh boy, listen, you are going to have that. Sure, they're going to take in what Jesus takes in, and they are going to be baptized. I'm not talking about water baptism. They are going to be immersed and to be put into what Jesus is put into. For they also were persecuted. Those apostles, the sons of thunder. They had to deal with the same things that Jesus did. Sure, they're able, they say, but they don't really know what they're asking. Because Jesus says that those two places, on the right hand and on the left hand, is actually reserved for someone else. The actual passage says, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. For those two thieves that were crucified on either side of Jesus. Oh, they were rebuked. They were rebuked. And the application is so simple for us. If we lose control of our tenacity, when we lose control of our tenacity, we lose our grip on healthy determination and we exchange it for pride. Sometimes we say, well, look at me and look at what all I have accomplished. Look at what I've done. Look at how faithful I am, and look how my family has been members of the church here for all these years. Look how much wealth that I've been able to accumulate and made a good living for myself, and I'm able to give financially, generously, sacrificially to the Lord and His church. Now, all those things are good things. There's nothing wrong with accomplishing those things. There's nothing wrong with having determination and tenacity, saying, I want to accomplish this. There's nothing wrong with having tenacity and determination to say, I want my family to be a part of the church and have a long-standing, faithful relationship with Jesus. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with saying, I want to work hard, earn some money, and I want to give sacrificially to the Lord. But the problem is that when we allow those things to become the center of everything else that we are, and we let that fester into our hearts and become prideful, we lose our grip on tenacity, and we center it around pride. Oh, and arrogance. That's the problem. That's what we have to be scared of. That's thunder. Ooh, thunder. That's the sons of thunder. You know what's interesting about it is we've got to control our own temper. We've got to control our own tongue, and we've got to control our own tenacity. Otherwise, we lose our grip on what is real, on reality. We forget who we are, and we say things that we shouldn't, and we let pride overtake our lives. And that's not real. I hope that you've enjoyed getting to know your apostles. I hope that it's been beneficial to you, and I hope that you've enjoyed getting to know the sons of thunder. Because a lot of times when we're looking at each one of these apostles and we say, look, I'm getting to know them, and I see how these men are this way and how they reacted in their own lives, before too long, when you're getting to know your apostles, you begin to get to know yourself. And you see yourself in those apostles. And this is a wonderful time for self-reflection. And to see some areas in your own life that you need to improve. I love the sons of thunder because we do see their improvements. If James was willing to give his life for the sake of Christ, as we read about in Acts chapter 12, I know that he changed from being a son of thunder to being a son of God. I know that John changed who he was. When you read the accounts of the gospel in the book of John, and when you read 1st and 2nd and 3rd John, and you see his awe and amazement at the sight of God in the book of Revelation, you know that he changed from being a son of thunder to being a son of God. And maybe it's time for you, too, to have some self-reflection and to change as well. If you need to respond to the Lord's invitation this morning, whether you need prayers or to obey the gospel, come as together we stand and as we sing.